there is a structural question that companies, regulators, and investors can no longer ignore. What if the real competitive advantage in artificial intelligence is not the technology itself, but the regulatory environment in which that technology is developed and deployed? Because today, we're not witnessing a single global framework for artificial intelligence. What we are witnessing is fragmentation. On one side, the European Union is refining a comprehensive risk-based regulatory regime through the AI Act and the latest development under the so-called Digital Omnibus package. On the other hand, the United States is consolidating a policy-driven, innovation-oriented approach through its National AI Policy Framework, recently approved, and federal guidance. This is not just a legal divergence, it's a structural shift that is already influencing investment flows, product design, data strategies, and ultimately market leadership. I'm Giulio Coraggio, a technology and a data lawyer at the global law firm DLA Piper. This is Diritto al Digitale, the podcast where we explore the intersection between law and innovation. So, let's start with Europe. The AI Act represents the first comprehensive attempt globally to regulate artificial intelligence through a binding horizontal framework. But what is particularly relevant today is not the text of the AI Act itself, it's how that text is evolving. Recent developments linked to the so-called Digital Omnibus initiative and the positions adopted by the European Parliament through its committees, as well as the Council of the European Union, highlight a clear trend. Implementation complexity is forcing regulatory recalibration. We're seeing postponement of obligations relating to high-risk AI systems, potentially shifting key deadlines to 2027 and 2028. The reintroduction and strengthening of registration requirements in the EU database for high-risk systems, the confirmation of stricter conditions for processing of spatial categories of personal data, and the introduction of new prohibited practices, including AI systems generating non-consensual intimate content. This is not deregulation, it's regulatory engineering. The EU is acknowledging that enforceability is as critical as ambition. So, the EU model, how it's structured. The AI Act is built on a structured risk taxonomy. AI systems are classified into prohibited systems, high-risk systems, limited risk systems, and minimal risk systems. For high-risk systems, the regulatory burden is significant and highly operational. Companies must implement robust risk management systems aligned with lifecycle obligations, data governance frameworks, ensuring quality, relevance, and bias mitigation. Extensive technical documentation and record keeping, human oversight mechanisms, conformity assessments, and registration in the EU database. This is not simply a legal framework. It's a compliance architecture. It effectively embeds regulatory requirements into the design, development, and deployment of AI systems, what we can define as compliance by design and by default. However, this approach has clear implications. It increases time to market, operational costs, and internal governance complexity. If we shift to the United States, the paradigm changes entirely. There is no single comprehensive federal AI law equivalent to the AI Act. Instead, the US regulatory landscape is characterized by the National AI Policy Framework, recently approved, executive orders, sector-specific regulations, and strong reliance on existing legal tools, including consumer protection and competition law. The approach is fundamentally different. It prioritizes innovation and technological leadership, public-private collaboration, flexible standards, and enforcement primarily ex post. Even when regulatory intervention occurs, it often takes the form of voluntary commitments, soft law instruments, or agency guidance. This creates a significantly more agile environment for AI development, but it also shifts risks from an ex-ante compliance to ex-post liability. So there are two models and two regulatory philosophies. At this stage, it's clear that we are not simply comparing two regulatory frameworks. We are comparing two different regulatory mindsets, two different approaches. The EU model is precautionary. It assumes that the AI systems inherently generate risks that must be mitigated before deployment. The US model is permissive. It assumes that innovation should not be constrained unless and until concrete risks materialize. This divergence has immediate practical consequences. For example, an AI provider operating in the EU must integrate compliance processes at the earliest stages of development. The same provider in the US may prioritize speed, scalability, and market penetration, addressing legal risks at a later stage. For globally active companies, this is not a theoretical debate. It's an operational challenge because they cannot choose one model over the other. They must manage both simultaneously. This creates a need for a multi-layered AI governance framework, jurisdiction-specific compliance strategies, and scalable internal controls capable of adapting to different regulatory expectations. And this is where many organizations are currently exposed. Because without a structured AI governance model, companies risk integrating AI solutions into their core operations without fully assessing regulatory risks, data protection implications, liability exposure, and compliance obligations. The issue is timing. These risks often emerge when the AI system is already embedded in business processes. At that point, remediation becomes significantly more expensive, operational disruption increases, and reputational damage becomes a concrete risk. There is a narrative suggesting that regulation slows innovation, but this is, in many respects, an oversimplification. The absence of regulation does not eliminate risks. It redistributes it and often amplifies it. The real question is not whether regulation is needed, it's whether we can design regulatory frameworks that are predictable, scalable, and technologically neutral. Because ultimately, legal certainty is itself a driver of innovation. Looking ahead, several developments will be critical. In the European Union, the finalization of the Digital Omnibus adjustments, the progressive implementation of the AI Act, and the development of secondary legislation and standards. In the US, further consolidation of federal AI policies, increased activity by regulatory agencies, and potential sector-specific legislative interventions. At a global level, we expect increasing regulatory competition and possibly gradual convergence driven by market forces. So, let me leave you with this question. Will the future of artificial intelligence be shaped primarily by engineers or by regulators? And more importantly, are companies truly prepared to operate in a world where AI regulation moves at a different speed across jurisdictions? If you have views on this topic, feel free to reach me out at giulio.coraggio@yellowpaper.com. And if you found this episode interesting, subscribe to the podcast, activate the notification bell, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Giulio Coraggio, this is the podcast Diritto al Digitale. Arrivederci!